Hey folks, Steve here, a few minutes late to the proper stream, I think. I've got 4 people on viewers. Folks may be coming on or dropping. YouTube had warned me that at first my stream connection was excellent and that it was going to be good to go, and then right before we were going to go true live, we got a warning that the bit rate dropped. So if there's major issues at play here, let me know. We'll try to handle as we can. Throw stuff in the chat, and I'll try to keep an eye on this as we go. So it's going to be a little choppy, maybe to start with. When I did a test run, the quality was supposed to be pretty good, but I'm at the mercy of my internet service provider. So we'll handle how we can, and again, let me know in the chat if we're running into a lot of major issues along the way. Plan is to try to stream for an hour, maybe 2 hours, depending on how in the flow we are. And again, the recording will be available on the channel after the fact. And at the very least, if the bit rate is bad and you guys aren't getting good stream quality, the recording I'm making will go up instead and should be a decent record of the stream, so folks can watch afterwards anyway. So today we're going to be looking at World in Flames. The view that I have here up on the stream is the official Vassal module, and what I have loaded up is a campaign setup called Victory in the West, Harry's setup. And for those who want to follow along, we can run through a couple different things. So one is, if you go out to the ADG website, so it's www.a-d-g.com.au, you can go to their download section, and here they have all of the latest PDFs for the rules and scenario information. And I have a couple of these files open, so if you're interested in World in Flames, you want to follow along. There is the color rulebook. The reason I have this brought up is just in case I want to reference the unit description charts, which are full color. They're useful for seeing what all the numbers on an individual chit mean, so I'm usually pretty good about remembering, but as a sanity check, I have it here. The latest rules are November 6, 2021, so slight revisions or errata being addressed. They're all fairly minor in the grand scheme of things, but I'll have that up for reference. And then ADG has invented time travel, and we have our living campaign and player notes from the 25th of October 2023, so 2 years into the future. We have this, obviously a typo, but this being the scenario information for any given playthrough that you might be interested in playing, as well as there's setup information in here, which I think if you are a newer player, it's very easy to kind of gloss over this, but there are a lot of setup guidance that, if you're playing with a lot of options and different things, it actually matters that you read this and you kind of understand what the setup instructions are really for. This is maybe where things get complex if you're a new player and you don't know how to do setup, or you've never really tried to do setup before. Really worth taking your time through it the first time. And we'll get into a little bit of this in the later parts of the stream. At least that's the plan. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so the final thing is the setup charts. Now this is available both as an Excel file and a PDF, and so you can open up in either. The PDF is just easier for me, so I don't have to deal with the actual cells. But they have in here a whole breakdown of every scenario, what units need to go where, pulled out of the force pools that are available for the given scenario that you want to play. And so this is like, we could do a whole video on just this, but the way that this is laid out is for a given scenario. So you can see here, Victory in the West, May, June 1940 to Jan, Feb 41. This will tell you what HQs are in play, how many armory units, how many mech, how many motorized, how many regular infantry, militia, garrison, any other oddball ones. your fighters, your land bombers, naval bombers, air transports, your naval units, your offensive points, and then if you're playing with expansions, then really the farthest right third of the chart is for all the stuff that can come in with the expansion. So if you're doing Planes and Flames, then you're going to have and this is one of those specific things you need to read in the campaign book, like you will get to choose from a broader set of starting air units, but you still only get some of them. You still only get, if we look at this one, the UK, the Commonwealth is going to get 4 aircraft, 2 fighters, and then 2 land bombers of different types. But if you're playing with Planes and Flames, you actually get to choose from a broader set that could be the starting planes that you get. So it sounds complicated. It's really not so bad, but there is a certain level of expertise that you gain by going through this a couple of times. And what helps is that when we're looking at a smaller scenario, that stuff is a lot easier because you're really dealing with less counters overall than if you're playing the full global campaign and you had to set up the whole map for both Europe and the Pacific and all that good stuff. Over here you then also have your ships in flames, light cruisers in flames, convoys in flames, where they're really just telling you, you need, these ships, you need the Nelson, you need the Resolution, you need the Revenge, the Warspite, 3 transports. But then if you're playing with ships in flames, you also need, out of the ships in flames counter set, the Barham, Ramillies, Rodney, Royal Sovereign, Valiant. In addition, and again, this is nuance that we could spend a lot of time in. I may just gloss over. And then finally, you have all these additional units that come from divisions in flames or territories in flames, where you get 2 guns, so 2 artillery, an infantry and an engineer division, and it's a little hard to tell because I'm not viewing this in Excel, so the cells are not lined up. The Commonwealth essentially has unlimited oil for the purposes of the scenario. So oil is kind of split down the middle. You see the word unlimited, right? But for France has 3 oil. Germany has 7 oil. So this is the kind of thing that, depending on, again, what optional rules you're using, this might not always be relevant. And in fact, if you're playing just the classic game, and this is going to be important for a second when we go back to the Vassal module, if you're just playing the classic game, you really only need to worry about up to here, right? Right up to, I'd say maybe 40% of the width of the page. This is really all you need, right? Because correction, you need out to here. So I guess a little over 50% of the page. You need your naval units, right? My bad. So you need out to here because you're going to get all your land units, all your air units, all your naval units. And it's only past this point when we start looking at offensive points and all the expansion counters. You only need to worry about this stuff if you're choosing to play with all of that stuff. Now, I normally do, and I think for the purposes of these streams, whenever we do them, whenever I can do more recording for these things, I will be playing with optional rules and with expansion stuff, and we'll kind of talk through that a little bit more as a part of the content for the stream today. Going back to the Vassal module for a second, so again, this is the official Vassal module released by ADG. I received access to this when I pre-ordered the Collector's Edition, back when it was on pre-order however long ago, several years ago, so that when all the goods were delivered, I also was emailed access, perpetual access to this Vassal module. Now, if you did not do that, or you don't have the game, you can purchase access to the Vassal module separately, I think. That's a little bit different than a lot of Vassal modules for GMT games or Compass games, where they're usually freely available, or at least available via some official means. Here, you may need to purchase them. There are non-official versions of the Vassal module that I think you can get for free, but just for ease, I'm using the official one because I'm most familiar with it after playing around in here for a while. So this is version 1.06.p, which as far as I know is the latest version of the Vassal module. And if you're not familiar with Vassal, if somehow you're watching this and you're not familiar with Vassal, go ahead and Google Vassal engine into your Google search, or if you use a different search engine, and you'll find it. It's like, I believe it's vassalengine.org. You can download the primary software and then the modules that can go with it, and you can play these games online with people. They can join a same session and play a game together. If you're using something like Discord or Skype or some other video or chat feature, you can do audio with somebody and play through the game. But I have this set up as an offline game, so you guys will not have access to what I'm looking at right this second. In the future, that could change, and we can explore that in the future. The breakdown of what's all available in here is pretty much everything you need to play World in Flames. So there are counter sheets, or what functionally operate as counter sheets, so you can look at any major power, and you say, show me the classic counter, show me the deluxe, factory in Flames, all this other stuff, game counters. Hey Dwight, hey Unwound93, thanks for commenting, so I know people are out there listening. I have not unwound, I have not tried to play a game on Vassal online. I tried once with somebody who wasn't familiar with Vassal in the first place. It's probably not the best try, but we did try to do something, and I think there was just connectivity issues. But I do know a lot of people who do play Vassal games online with or other stuff on some regular cadence, and I think it works out very well for them. I've not taken the dip into that to really get started with it. But I like Vassal because I can open up a game, right, without getting the box open, without taking up table space. And if I just want to look at something, or I want to see if something would work, a particular strategy, I can do that quickly in Vassal without too much pain. And I can do that on my laptop or my computer here. Peter Bergs, thanks for commenting there. Interesting game. I don't have time to get into it yet. Watching with interest. Well, yeah, I hope this helps show kind of what the value is. Like, this game may not be for everybody, that's for sure. And when you really, like, if you were to go find out how many counters are in the deluxe version of this game, I think it comes out to be like 4,500 or more. Like, it's definitely a big game, and it's a big commitment game, and it is for some people a lifestyle game. And I should talk about like why World in Flames is even worth folks' time. But just going through this Vassal interface again, there's access to all the counters, but otherwise you have all the record charts that are in here with some counters ready to go and in place to use. You have force pools that are set up depending on what scenario you're loading up. They're already set up for the counters that are organized, and then you also have kit inventory. So if this game gets into 41, then these counters here in the 41 rows get added to the force pools, and you may use different counters based on, are you playing with the deluxe stuff, or are you just playing the classic? The Vassal module is actually really nice in that they've organized it very well, that if you're trying to play one of the standard scenarios, there's a lot of support there. If you're doing something weird and different, for the most part you still have a lot of ways to get there. They've got the production spiral stuff set up here. They actually have it set up so that there is a axis production circle. I guess it's the circle, not the spiral anymore. The production circle for Axis. There's one for the allies. If you're playing physically with your buddies, you're probably sharing one big production spiral, but there you go. And there's task forces. This comes from Ships and Planes expansion, so they just have some support in here for that. The build sheet, which for now I don't think we're really going to be focusing much on builds with these shorter scenarios, but I will probably do my build recording in an Excel spreadsheet. I don't think I'm going to need that today, but in the future I need to remember to pull the spreadsheets that me and my buddies have been using in our in-person game, because they're very, very helpful. And there's a bunch of there's so much functionality in here. Like, to me, this is a very well-made Vassal module, but there's a lot of density to it. The nice thing is you still have access to a lot of these nice game function counters. You can clone them, make a whole bunch more as you need to, which is always handy. You have the ability to do things like set what the weather is. So if we are looking in, the North Temperate weather zone, which is what the most of this map is, that's going to matter for the scenario that we're looking at. You'd say, oh well, it is right click. We say it's storm, and oh look, you can see there is some graphic on the map showing that it's storm, or at least something, right? You get the little lightning bolts shapes if you guys can see that. If you say it's snow, then it's kind of this whiteout. If it's a blizzard, then it almost looks like rain to me, but then this is what rain's supposed to be. So at the very least, you know that there is some weather at play here, which is nice to have a visual effect on the map when you're playing. You can look at other maps here. So right now the scenario that we loaded up actually puts the map that we're going to use into the main pane of the Vassal module. If we had picked a different scenario, like the global war scenario, there would be, my left to right scroll bar would be much bigger, where we would have all of the European theater of operations and all of the Pacific stuff. But there's also other map functions we can pull up. So we can say, show me the U.S. map, and this is the U.S. mini map that sits off to the side. In a in-person game, you can also look at the optional Scandinavian map, which was sort of a bonus thing that they had. It's, I think, part of the Kickstarter or something. They wanted to include a separate Scandinavian map if you wanted to do, your Winter War and Murmansk drama in a little bit different portrayal, which, I don't know that this is really needed, but we do use it in our game now, in our in-person game. And then some scenarios have what's called a transfer pool, which just represents like off-map stuff. This is just a window or opportunity to leverage something to represent that. And there's a bunch of the charts. So 2d10 combat results table, that is an optional rule. All the stuff from the player charts, air combat charts, everything related to air combat put together, all the naval stuff. And then we've got the land combat. This would be if you're playing the standard 1d10 combat chart, which at this point, I've heard that now, as of Collector's Edition, the difference between these is not huge, but I'm very much used to the 2d10 charts. That's probably what we're going to end up using here. And they've got die rolls, so easy peasy. Roll a d10, you get a number. Roll 2d10, you get the two numbers, add them together, or whatever you're trying to do for your die roll. So the Vassal module is pretty good. The nice thing that they included in here as a way to help new players is that, when you come into here and you select the campaign setup, you can see there's a whole list here, right? To run through them quickly: Victory in the West, Harry setup, which is what is on screen now; Victory in the West, which is more of the free setup of the standard scenario that's defined. There's Barbarossa, which is very specific to the Eastern Front only, a short duration; Guadalcanal for the Pacific, relatively short duration, and then you start getting bigger and bigger until you're saying just give me one theater of operations, or give me the global war setup with all the counters I need. And the thing about this game is, if you're unfamiliar with it, there's no set setup. I don't like the word set twice in a row, but there's no okay, if you're playing this scenario, this is where everything goes, hex by hex, this hex code, put this unit, this core, this whatever. The game is not like that. It would be even more paperwork to try to capture all of that. And so what you get in the setup charts is that you're told how many of something in a broad region. So the UK can put this many things in the UK. They're allowed to put this many things into France, and so on and so forth the whole way through. But you have to pick what hex they're going to go in within those, broad requirements. And so what I thought I'd do, at least for a good chunk of the stream, is kind of evaluate this Harry's setup. So this is from Harry Rowland. He's the principal designer of World in Flames, and so he's provided this as a, hey, here's what I use, and if you're just looking to jump right into the game, use this and have some fun, which is a great idea. But I want to try to figure out, well, why did he choose to put the things in place that he did, and what all is the thinking here, and why, if we try to apply that same mentality to other fronts and other scenarios, um, what's the real lessons here, right? Because I think it's one thing to learn World in Flames, right? There is some difficulty in learning how to play this game, um, and there's a lot of videos out for this now, right? Tabletop Edge has done some great videos. I really recommend those if you're learning the game. I had done some a long time ago. I think Tabletop's Edge is much better at this point, and folks should go to that for some newbie stuff. And then I think there's a point where you get into like this intermediate level of needing to understand, okay, you know how the rules work, but how do you make them work for you? How do you actually play the game with a level of skill where you're going to have fun and you're not going to get crushed by somebody who's halfway competent at the game, because you just don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. And I want to try to keep, whenever we do these streams, trying to pursue that, because I don't think I'm a very good World in Flames player at the end of the day, but I am learning a lot every time I play it. For every new power that I've played that I hadn't played before, I start to get that, oh, this was foolish that I did this. I didn't realize it worked this way. I didn't realize that this was an option at my disposal. This would have kept some bad thing from happening. And I think that'll help folks adjust to the game over time. In terms of like, why would anyone play World in Flames? Well, there are a lot of big World War II games out there, right? There is A World at War. There is Axis Empires. World in Flames has always been a contender. There is now I believe it's called The War from Compass Games, though I've not experienced that game very much. I have no idea if it's really good or if it's just okay. I have a friend who's played it, and he liked it well enough, but it's not one that I think toppled other games that he's liked. I think the thing with World in Flames is that, yes, the first version of World in Flames came out in 1985, I think, at least according to the Board Game Geek page for it. It has gone through a number of versions over the years, refinements, and I think that, at least with the Collector's Edition, it has gotten to the point where it is pretty well refined. It has had time to develop its nuances, and unlike other games like A World at War, you really have to think about things at a level of detail that becomes just enough to be manageable, but is still a lot. But if you like that, then it's great, right? And what I mean by that is, like, if you look at A World at War, you might look at a region on the map, and when I say World at War, I mean the game from GMT, which is a new version of Advanced Third Reich, newer version, I guess. It's been around for a while. You might look at one region of the map, and it'll say, hey, that's worth 20 basic resource points, burps. 20 burps, that's what it's worth, that's it, right? And as long as you control that area, then you're going to get the points for that, and you can build stuff. That's simplifying it a bit, but that's basically how that economic system works. Well, in World in Flames, you can see the map looks really busy, and it kind of is, but every hex that has something in it, something is in it for a game reason that can be tied back to a rule that is easily understood as part of a system. So it's not just that, and I'm going to turn the counters off for a second. It's not just that, the Rhineland is worth so many basic resource points. It's that within the Rhineland, there are resources that are useful. I just moved these guys. Whoops. There are resources that are useful. There are factories that are useful. There are cities. There's terrain that matters here. And so when you're looking at that, like if the Germans lost, they're not losing the Rhineland. They're losing a hex in the Rhineland. Well, now all of a sudden they've lost the, whatever this represents. Maybe it's a series of, mineral mines. They've lost access to that. If they lose Cologne, they're losing the industrial output of the Rhineland. And so you get to this more zoomed in perspective of what hex matters and why. Now they don't go to a deep level of saying, well, this is tungsten and this is, coal or whatever, trying to figure that out. It's just, hey, yeah, this is a resource, but then also that for production, resources have to go to factories. So it allows you to have a differentiated economy. Germany just isn't sitting on, 80 basic resource points all the time. They have a lot of factories, but they may be starved for resources. So that drives them to try to capture resources. Or a country might be heavy in resources but not be very industrialized. So they're trying to figure out a way to get resources to factories. They want to grab factories, or they're trading resources in exchange for some build points back. So there's a little bit of a differentiated economy. The way that the convoy systems work in this game, the naval systems work in this game, the way units are transported in this game add to a logistical challenge where, like, if you start thinking about things like D-Day, D-Day isn't just going to happen for you. You have to figure out when you're going to build the units that you need, how they're going to get to the UK from the US, if you're the US player, and then how are you going to get them onto the continent in Normandy. And you have to think the whole way through that operation. You have to build it, plan it, make it happen, move the units, get them across the Atlantic Ocean, get them in place, get the air cover. Where other games might make that kind of glossed over easy, in that maybe you're just dealing with a simple strategic move action and you just move everything over across the map very quickly and easily. And for some people that works, and for others you want a little bit more control over that, and that the Axis has an ability to try to disrupt that, right? Battle of the Atlantic, that sort of thing. All interesting, fun stuff in the world of WIF. So, without going through like a whole primer of this is how you play WIF, I'm going to start talking through this setup, and I'll try to mention some basic things along the way. If it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you, just ignore the nuances of the specific rules and just think about things in wargame terms. That might help you until you watch some of the Tabletop's Edge videos about, like, well, what does all of this mean? Why is it set up this way? I think if we look at the setup charts, right, the way this is set up is that the order that the powers are listed in are the order that you set up. So if you say, hey guys, we're going to play Victory in the West, May, June 1940, the Commonwealth player will set up first, the French player will set up second, Germany will set up last, and that's actually an advantage because you can set up your units in reaction to how the players preceding you have set up units. So if we looked at it that way, then it's probably worth looking at the Commonwealth setup first that Harry has for us. And I'll once again remind, I might maybe mention it earlier, Harry's setup, the thing listed Harry's setup, is very specifically using the classic game. So you'll see there are no divisions present in here. It is all core level or higher units, so I don't see any other expansion counters here. So this is truly the most basic new player friendly scenario setup because it doesn't even use any of the expansions. And I'm pretty certain that there's no optional rules flagged here. So this is something we can talk about more later. Optional rules are a whole thing that World in Flames is notorious for, but it's part and parcel to the experience. So the Commonwealth has a couple of things already set up, right? So this is this is sort of after the Sitzkrieg, where the Allies have kind of set up their static defense. This is prior to Germany entering the Netherlands or Belgium, though that is, I believe, required on the very first action of the game. Germany will go first. They will declare war on some or all of these powers, and you have, case yellow underway. So on the continent, we'll zoom in a little bit. The Commonwealth has Wavell, I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce a million things, so bear with me, guys. I read these names. I don't hear these names spoken very often. So this is an armor HQ. So the HQ has the flag picture. They have an armor present. And the 2 in parentheses is the sort of HQ organizational value for the HQ. For the purposes of being in France, this means that this HQ can be present in France, and up to 2 additional units can be present in France. Um, and Kenneth Clovey says, a Third Reich player here just picked up A World at War with is similar, so I'm interested. Yeah, I mean, I have a very difficult relationship with A World in Flames that I'll just say that it is not necessarily my cup of tea, and that I do think that A World at War is desperately in need of a GMT developer to be assigned to make the game more usable out of the box, that a player can learn how to play the game properly, and that the rules need to be refined into something a little easier to use. That's just my criticism. It's okay. But World in Flames is a lot of fun, and it's got its own idiosyncrasies, but it's definitely my game when I have to compare the two. So the 2 units here are 2 motorized corps, the 14th and the 4th, that are set up along the coast. That's probably an unsurprising setup, generally speaking, for any World War II game at this scale. The the fact that Harry has set up this HQ far away from the front line, I think, is just indicative of, like, you don't want to lose this guy. Because what will happen, and this is part of the foreign commitment rules of the game, is if you have 2 powers that do not naturally cooperate, you can only have units in each other's home country if you have an HQ, and then up to that value, right? So we have the HQ, we have 2 units. Those are the only units that are British, Commonwealth, that are allowed to be in France, and if we wanted more, we would have to send additional HQs. So that's referred to as a foreign troop commitment level. And so if somehow this HQ unit was removed, then these units could not be in France. They would not be allowed to be in France. And I can't recall. They might go poof. I can't recall. They might have to go to the production circle. Now that I'm saying it, I'm like, crap, I don't know the exact rule for that, because I've never had that happen, but it could happen, right? So Harry setting up this HQ far behind the front line is to make sure that we are safe, that these units are 1, 2, 3 hexes from the HQ, which means they're by and large good to go in terms of supply. Standard supply tracing is basically from an HQ or a home city up to 4 hexes away. Weather can reduce that, but assuming these units can trace back to the HQ, and then the HQ can trace along a rail line to a port that can get back home, then these British units are good to go. That's simplifying a couple aspects, but it's straightforward in my mind, and I'm so used to this that to me it's straightforward. Maybe it won't be for new folks. Henry Knox Fine Book says WIF is by far the best strategic World War II game out there. I agree with it. Hard agree. Absolutely agree with that. An Epic Fox Tabletop says yes. WIF time. It is WIF time, at least for now. So typically the Commonwealth is going to be looking to put motorized units out here. Their strengths are 5 and 6, so that's pretty good in the early war. It's okay. They don't have a lot of options. Now, what somebody could do is you could try to set up like your HQ with a unit. So now this hex has 10 combat factors. But the danger is, again, if the Germans attack this hex in force and destroy the HQ, gets a result where 2 units are destroyed on the defender's part, and you lose that HQ, then this guy's going to have problems right away. So it feels shallow, like a shallow defense here, right? Like, oh, we've only got the 2 units. Is that enough? But this is the best that can be done right now, I think, at the beginning of this scenario. And as I look around, I do not see... I'm going to guess that there is not another HQ available. when you're playing the global war, you start with an HQ in Egypt, and one of the strategies is to try to pull that HQ from Egypt to France, which I've never done that because I'm too worried about Egypt, but that is something to try. Um, Kenneth Claudia says, I don't know if it's mentioned in the World at War documentation, but you can learn the game by going through scenarios one by one, program learning, so to say. It is true that you can try to learn that way. That is what I'll say. It is true you can try to learn that way, absolutely. Okay, so this I think makes sense, what Harry has set up for us, right? HQ safely behind a river. That's another thing. The river will reduce the attack factors that are attacking across it, as long as those counters are attacking across the hex side that has the river. So from ruin to here, from this hex to here, there's a river along the hex side that helps protect the HQ. So probably good placement there. You can see the French HQ is the same, right? Behind the river line, adjacent to Paris, but is at least safe. Now, what else he has set up here, again, some of this is governed a bit by the setup rules. So when we look at this, like that's interesting. I thought something was weird. I'm like, wait a minute. He starts in Egypt in the global game. I'm like, why is that Wavell? So apparently that's supposed to be Gort. So Harry's setup is an error, but let's see if we can easily fix that right now. Let's see. Where did he put... Maybe there's an optional rule that's like you can pick Wavell instead, but if you do, there's some cost. That's funny. I wonder what he did with it. Surprise. Okay. Is this Gort? Okay, this is Gort. So, we're going to put Wavell in the ocean for now, and we're going to put Gort down here, because at least according to the setup charts, which are the latest, the UK can have Gort present in the 2 motorized units, right? And then in the UK, they're going to have a mech and an infantry. And if we go back to the Vassal module, we can see the infantry that's in the UK, they drew a white print 7-3 unit, so a 7 is really quite good. That's a strong unit. It's also white print, which means that if that unit is ever out of supply and flipped, it will defend with 3 combat factors instead of 1. So that's a nuance of the supply rules, and it's a little special thing to know. But white print units are good, and they're especially good where they might get cut out of supply. So evidently this unit was drawn, placed in London. I really doubt that Germany is in any way, shape, or form able to do a Sea Lion in this small scenario, but if you got to put it in the UK and you only get 1 unit, you might as well put it into the capital. The mech unit is here in Scapa Flow. Now, one of the interesting things is that Scapa Flow, I believe, is considered part of the UK, and it's part of the UK home country because it can be reached. There's a rule in the early part of the rulebook that defines these things, right? That a Commonwealth Marine can get to it, and they can. That a Marine unit can walk, quote unquote walk, from one land hex across one water hex side to another hex with land in it. So you can reach Scapa Flow. It is part of the home country. It is part of the UK, which means you can place it here. The only trick is you can have Scapa Flow's supply cut. So you have to trace supply back to home country city. Scapa Flow is a major port, but it has no city on it, so you actually could lose supply to Scapa Flow. But he has this mechanized unit up here. when we look at the setup information, right, they say UK gets 1 mech and 1 infantry. Okay. Well, the infantry is quite good, but we need to have something in London. That makes sense from Harry's setup. The mechanized unit is here in Scapa Flow. Why it's specifically in Scapa Flow, I am not 100% sure. I know what the intention is with this unit, but I am not sure why it has to be Scapa Flow. And really, this might just be for organizational sake, because what Harry has set up here is he has a number of surface vessels. So he has the Nelson, the Resolution, the Warspite, and the Revenge. These are all battleships. I think they're all considered battleships in the context of the game. If I look at they're all battleships. He has these, right? These units will provide shore bombardment capability and can do fun stuff along the coast. So these guys are set up here. They honestly could be set up in Newcastle, for instance, or Edinburgh, or Hull. These major ports, or London. The reason why Scapa Flow is useful in a larger game context is because it connects to both the North Sea Sea Zone and the Faroes Gap Sea Zone. So you can send a fleet from Scapa Flow over here or over here. Either or is fine. They can do that. But if you were in Newcastle, for instance, they would have to go out to here and then over to here if you wanted to get them into the Faroes Gap. So kind of an easy thing. But then we have 3 transports here. We only need 1 to move this mechanized unit. But what we want to be able to do is, why they're all together, is that in a single naval move, we would have our fleet of battleships, a transport, and the unit riding the transport, and they would all go out to sea, and they would all end up, make sure I'm not lying, in the 3 box. Now, naval movement, I don't want to do a whole naval movement tutorial because I've done videos for that. Tabletop's Edge has done videos for that. But the idea being, these all have, if you look at the orange and yellow numbers, they're all pretty close to one another. What matters here is the orange number. They spend 1 of the orange number leaving port, and then what's left over, if they're only going to an adjacent sea zone, is the sea zone box that they get to. And to simplify things for this video, higher in the sea zone, the better. Generally speaking, for service vessels, the 0 box is special because that's where convoys go, and any convoy escorts that you have are going to go there. So the idea is, in 1 naval move, because they're all together, they move as 1 naval move out to the 3 box, and then, and then what, right? That, I think, is going to come down to what happens later when the game is actually underway, because what's going to happen is, it is very likely that as the Germans get through the Netherlands, through Belgium, and then into northern France, if they lose this unit, then that opens up stacking to allow 1 more unit to join, so we could get this mechanized unit in here to replace a unit, or well, I guess that's probably the best thing, right? I do not believe we have access to Wavell in this scenario at all. We're not supposed to, I don't believe. Might have to double check the special rules for the scenario, but I do not believe we should have access to that HQ. This guy's going to pop in and replace one of these that is lost. If it's this or this unit, this guy can come in instead. Maybe we're back up to here, but at least we've still got something guarding the coast, right? That's one potential use of the mechanized unit. The other thing is, the British player might say, well, and this really only matters more in a global campaign where you're going to play past, 41. Could be, you're like, oh, this situation is bad. We need to, Operation Dynamo, we need to get everybody home. Well, the 3 transports here are just enough to transport all these guys home. Gort and the 2 motorized infantry, 1 per transport, they can all come out to sea and can be sucked off the coast and added to the transports and then taken home. The only thing will be, this guy cannot do that because he's not right on the coast. He's actually guarding Lille, and that could pose a challenge. So I can definitely see, Harry setting this up where you have some flexibility, right? If you think you're going to fight tooth and nail and you need to get that mechanized unit in here, you can definitely do that. If you think, oh, I need to get these guys home, you have the transports to do that. They're in Scapa Flow. All they have to do is pop into the North Sea, and you've got some way to save those guys. So the naval stuff, that makes sense. The ground units all make sense. If we look at the air units now, this will be pretty straightforward stuff. I don't expect there to be a lot of surprises. So how he has this set up, he has a strategic bomber with extended range. The yellow number here, or the yellow circle number, is the range of your aircraft, and that is to a mission. And then they get that many to return to base. So it's not, they're only going to spend some of that range getting somewhere, and then they spend the rest of it getting home. It's 6 hexes to wherever they're going, and then they get 6 hexes back home, or wherever they're going to land afterwards. So this particular unit has 6 normal range, and then the orange arrow signifies that it has extended range. So truly, this guy could actually fly to a mission 12 hexes away, which means we could go as far as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 into Germany, right? That it is conceivable to try to do that once the Netherlands and Belgium have had war declared on them. You can't fly over neutral territory or through neutral territory. So at 6 range, we would use the 3 value for strategic bombardment. If we were flying extended range, it would only be 2 because it's half rounded up, so 1.5 rounds up to 2. The lower left is going to be its ground factors. So if you're at all wondering, hey, how do I know this? You can look at the color rulebook on the ADG website, and they have the nice description of everything. So when we look at aircraft, top left is air to air, the top right is air to sea, bottom left is tactical factors for things like ground striking, ground support, and bottom right is the strategic factor. I don't think strategic warfare really matters at all in this scenario, so this plane really only has usability for ground striking and ground supporting, which, given the ally situation here, it's really going to be ground support. And I could talk about the difference between the two, but we'll gloss over that for now. He has this air transport here as well. Now, the air transport is useful for a couple of things. You can use them to reorganize a unit, so units can either be face up or face down. At the end of your impulse, you can potentially reorganize units, and having an air transport plane can allow you to do that. That might be an optional rule, but I always play with it, so I know that's one capability. The other is to transport paratroopers. So I do not see any paratroopers on the board for this scenario for the Allies, so this could be used to try to move units around, but I'm not sure what that's actually how this plane would end up getting used. So both of these units have pretty good range. They're able to be set back a little bit farther than the shorter range planes, which you can see have a 3 and a 3 range. It looks like, let's see, I'm going to double check that setup chart again. Do we have a garrison? We don't start with the garrison. Something's goofy with what Harry set up. This should not be here. So I don't know why this is here, but it probably should not be here. It would be good to put something in this minor port to protect it, but it should not have a garrison because I do not believe there are any garrisons as part of the setup. Yeah, there is not for the Commonwealth anyway, so I don't know, that's a mistake. Then we have this other bomber here, who's really only worth it for the ground support factors, also has longer range out to 6. So in terms of like how you're looking at it, obviously the planes with longer range can sit a little farther back, and then you want to give what limited aircraft stacking you have for shorter range stuff closer to where they need to be, right? It's sort of common sense, but that's how he has this set up. So these 2 planes are fighters, so they can be used to intercept enemy air missions or escort other bombers. And so I think what's going to end up happening with these guys and why they're set up this way is obviously the bombers are going to be used to provide ground support, which means they're going to add their tactical factors to the combat factors in the defender's hex or the attacker's stack if you're attacking in the combat. So it would be, just as an example, if all 3 of these guys supported this unit, it would be 5, the unit itself, plus 1, plus 2, plus 2, so a total of 10. You can only add ground support up to what ground factors are already there. So if we were coming in with 12, we would actually only be able to add, or I'm sorry, let's say 7, we could still only add 5 because 5 is all that is in this hex. Now if we look at the range, like one of these guys can go really far out, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But because the Commonwealth and the French do not cooperate, these guys are really only going to be useful protecting Commonwealth units and probably Belgian units after the surprise round anyway. So again, some nuances to the rules I'm kind of glossing over, but that's kind of how some of this stuff plays out. The fighters here have a 5 and a 4 air-to-air rating, so what will happen is when you do air combat, you are going to evaluate like what is the fighters involved in the combat. And if you look, this is kind of getting ahead of ourselves for the Germans. The Germans have a number of fighters. Their best fighters on the board, let's see, we've got the Bf-109, that's a 6. There's a 6. Fighters are the ones that are flying, our view is a lateral view, a side view of them flying to the left. That's a fighter. So they've got some 5s, they've got some 6s, they've got some 4s as well. I think the real issue for the Commonwealth is that we just don't have many fighters. We have limited ability to actually fly missions, so it's more likely that these are going to be used for escorting ground supporting bombers to the Commonwealth in northern France, the BEF functionally, in a given scenario. But Harry has set these up so that they can perform that action. When we look at the actual range for the fighters, they can go 1, 2, 3, right? This furthest one out, this one can go 1, 2, 3. So by and large, all of these planes are going to be able to protect sort of, if you follow my mouse, this range of stuff. Wise Guy History, hey man, how's it going? Thanks for joining, appreciate it. I hope this is fun. I can't recall if you played a lot of World in Flames or not. And by the way, guys, the feed that you're probably seeing is delayed by about a minute or 2. So if you put something in the chat, I've seen it probably right away, but you're not hearing me acknowledge it for a couple minutes after you've entered it, by the way. So just a heads up there, guys, but easy peasy. Okay, and that's it for the Commonwealth, right? So there's a couple of weird things with this Vassal module. It should not be this Armor HQ, it should be Gort. This garrison that is set up in Harwick should not be there, as far as I can tell, if I'm reading the setup notes correctly, and I know how to read the setup notes. So maybe there's something I missed in the scenario instructions, but we'll take a look at that later, depending on the length of the stream, or we'll hit it in the next one. But a mistake, I guess, on Harry's part. If you're playing Harry, make sure he's not cheating. But otherwise, the setup for the Commonwealth makes sense, right? We have some flexibility with our transports, with our relatively decent-sized fleet, and the mechanized unit hanging out in Scapa Flow. In a real game context, I would be cautious with this, but I don't know. You have less counters than you would in a full game, so there's just different considerations for a smaller scenario. Curmudgeons with Dice says, I own the first version of the game and I've never played. Rules are a bit ridiculous, so I'm really interested in seeing how this plays out. If you mean the first version as in like the first edition of World in Flames, that's super cool, one, that you have that. I can't speak to the quality of the first edition of the rules. I have a 5th edition copy, and the rules are certainly different, and my takeaway in researching is that 5th edition is simpler than the future iterations. But I'm at the point where I'm playing World in Flames in about the most complicated version that you can play, and it works for me. But I will say a great strength of World in Flames is that out of all the possible games you could be playing, right, like Axis Empires, or World at War, World in Flames, and others, it does have a sizable rule book, don't get me wrong, but it is laid out very well. The way that the rules are explained are pretty good. The procedures are all straightforward, and the game operates in a very system-oriented way, where there are the occasional exception to things and special historical nuances that affect a rule, but by and large, most things work in systems. So it doesn't matter if, like, yeah, Germany works a certain way or England works a certain way. No. Or I should say Britain, the Commonwealth. Their production works the same. They need resources that go to factories. Everybody works that way. It's all one system. You're not playing a thing where, like, Russia has a weird production model that is totally different than everybody else's. And so it's an 80-page rule book or whatever, but every rule that you learn is a system that will apply mostly everywhere. And once you got the rule, you don't have to worry about exceptions as much. So, to my mind, I think the game is a lot easier to learn than others, because I have tried others. But your mileage may vary there. And Wise Guy History, yeah, it's a game I know I'd love, but only room in my life for so many monsters. Yeah, that's a challenge in and of itself, right? Like, I have enough games on my shelf that have not gotten played yet. I've got Ted Racer's Case Yellow set up on my table, and I've had it set up on one of my game tables for like 5 or 6 months now, and my mind's on Whiff, and so I'm talking about Whiff instead of that game right now. But well, that's the way it is. Okay, so Commonwealth set up, we've kind of talked through that. The next country that gets set up is France. And Commonwealth and France are allies, obviously. So you could almost set them up at the same time. It almost doesn't matter. But again, Germany gets to set up in reaction to whatever the allies do. So France gets to set up some stuff. They get a couple of HQ. They get they get 3 HQ. They get an armor unit. They get a motorized unit. They get various infantry. They do get some minor countries, Morocco and Senegal, and a bunch of garrisons. And then they will get some units as reinforcements on the July-August turn, and I guess technically the Commonwealth does as well. They get a fighter, which we didn't really show that, but that's not really relevant for setup. And here's the whole setup here. Now, Harry put a transport down here in Marseille. In a global war context, I think that probably makes sense. For this scenario, I don't know that it really does anything, but it's there. I don't have much to say on it. So again, we talked about the HQ, so we mentioned the one HQ here situated behind the river line. That is for defensive purposes. There's no foreign commitment here because France is France, right? So the elimination of this HQ doesn't mean other units go poof or have any other issues. But you want to have the HQs protected because they may need to reorganize other units. So I mentioned units can become flipped or unflipped. When they're flipped, they can't move, and they can't do much at all. They can still defend as long as they're not out of supply and in pretty good order. But being flipped provides a bonus to the attacker if they get attacked. So having the HQ in a protected place where they can do their own reorganization and bring units back up to full strength by flipping them up. I shouldn't use the term full strength because there aren't steps in this game like other war games, but to reorganize them, that is useful. If I try to see where did the other HQs go? Here's one, and this placement is worth calling out. You can see that this is a forested hex. The reason why an HQ is good to set up in a forest hex like this is that when a hex is ground struck, is the target for a ground strike from an enemy bomber, like maybe the Stuka over here comes over. Think of it like it's defensive terrain for ground striking. So the attacker's ground striking factors, which for the Stuka would be a 5, is halved. So if you're going to have an HQ, as long as that forest kind of makes sense tactically, you're going to want to stick an HQ in the forest. And so this HQ has the forest for defense. It also has a fighter. Now that fighter may need to be used to intercept German planes doing other things, but at the very least, if ground strikes come to this hex, and this fighter hasn't been used in any other air combat, it will be able to defend the HQ, so that's important. And they should have one more HQ, and yep, it's in this forest hex down here as well. So the 3 French HQs, Harry has set up one near Paris, which makes sense, good to do, have something protecting the capital, which in this scenario actually matters a whole lot. I mean, it matters a whole lot all the time, but yes, for this scenario, given it's really a case yellow scenario, protecting Paris will be an important piece, so there is an HQ covering that part of the line, an HQ here, and an HQ here. So less protection, but this guy's further back anyway. They're not expecting to have German planes get all the way out here right away. Then the HQs here provide protection, and you'll see this HQ has another fighter on top protecting it as well. So they have that set up. What I find interesting is that there's this fighter. This is actually an interesting fighter because it has decent tactical bomber ratings as well. So fighter bomber, as you can look at that as. So he's set up way back here in the forest. And then we've got this land bomber who can do strategic bombardment, but again, I don't think that's going to be super relevant. Really going to be using for ground support is back here in Vichy in the forest as well. So it's value to be in the forest just so that like they can't be ground struck if you didn't fly them or something. The longer range means that these guys can support combats once Germany has entered France proper. So if we count that range out, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they actually, this ground supporting bomber can reach most of France, or what fighting will be done in France proper. Same thing with this guy with a 5 range, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It basically can reach the same hexes, and maybe this guy can even escort this bomber if they wanted to. Blue Tweezers, hey Blue Tweezers. Evening, it's early afternoon for me. So I look at this and I kind of wonder, the forest is probably selected by Harry for the defensive purposes. Why they're situated back here, these guys are not going to get overrun. That's sort of important. It doesn't make sense to have these guys set up way up here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hexes back is like back in Germany. You're not going to be fighting in Germany in this scenario as the Allies, right? You're going to be fighting, defending France, and trying to have France last as long as possible. So I think Harry's setup here is probably a good one. It can hit most of the places it's going to need to. The Commonwealth has to protect Belgium and itself, but France needs to protect France, so I think that setup makes sense. But besides, if we just look at like that fighter, this fighter, this fighter, this bomber, the French really don't have much in the way of air power in this scenario. And if I look at the setup, we're going to get a little bit more when we get a reinforcement, but comparatively, the Germans are going to, altogether have aircraft parity or superiority. Maybe the die rolls could go bad for the Germans. They start losing stuff, and the Allies get a chance to come back. But by and large, they're going to have to make some tough decisions, right? Are you going to try to intercept and fight an air battle against the Germans somewhere, and thus give up our ability to defend an HQ, and maybe the Germans follow up with a different ground strike on a later impulse against the HQ. So it's those decisions that are the difficult ones, right? You have a finite number of aircraft resources. When an aircraft is flown a mission, they become flipped, and they become unusable until they are reorganized by an HQ, which uses up the HQ. They flip when you do that. Or you get to the end of the turn and everything flips up and becomes reorganized. So it is a bit of an action economy kind of thing, right? Where are you going to spend those resources? The actual units and where they're set up for the French are kind of interesting. So you can see the Maginot Line is printed on the map, and they do have these set up. He has these set up 2 units per hex. So what's interesting is he had the Metz militia unit not set up in Metz, but he has set up in Paris as being the sole defender for the moment. The 2 corps in Strasbourg, 2 here in the forest hex along the border, and then a couple of guys in the mountains here. To me, this seems a little heavy. So when you're in mountains, you get double combat factors. So altogether, this is 12. I think maybe he could have gotten away with just having one of these here to 6, because you're only going to get attacked by one other hex, and it's just going to be bloody because the fort puts further penalties on the attacker. So from 1 hex to 1 hex, I'd be bold enough to try to leave just 1 unit here. I'd probably leave the garrison and move this guy maybe up to here or something like that. So I'm not sure. Harry has been playing the game for like 40 years, so he knows better than me, but I don't know that you need to have this hex double stacked. If someone's got a different opinion on that, I'm happy to hear it. It does unhinge the line. Like if you lose this hex, it's going to be impossible for the French to get it back, but then they do kind of have another route to kind of come through here, but I don't think the Germans are going to be set up to be doing that way. Behind the Maginot Line, there are a scattering of units, all 1 unit per hex. It's good so that if the Germans do get a breakthrough, they can't simply fly into yet another hex behind the line. But it does feel a little weird. Like I would maybe rather have one up here than here, personally. But again, Harry may be thinking about something that I'm not. You do have the minor country units up here, so the Moroccan unit and the Senegal unit, which are pretty strong, right? 5/6s. This unit is a white print, and this is obviously protecting sort of the Ardennes spot, which you get protection from the rivers here as well, which is good. Like you lose the Maginot, but you get some river defense. But that's only going to last so long. And then here in some of the few clear terrain hexes that don't have some terrain protection, Harry has decided to put the 1 armor unit protecting this resource hex. So the significance of armor and mech in land combat is if you have more armor or more mech where they don't have any mech or armor, you get bonuses to attack, right? That's the simplest way without doing a full tutorial. So this makes sense to me, right? He has this set up. It is going to be where the Panzers, the Panzer Corps, are going to have the greatest fun smashing through clear terrain to get to Paris. So it makes sense to have some defense here. Now the Germans would have to cut through Belgium as well, and so there's a chance that when we look at the Allied production spiral, see, they're going to get another corps in July and August, and then I have to look at the scenario rules again to validate, what more stuff can they expect. They'll get some production, so they'll build some stuff. But the thinking is, like, don't give the Germans any lucky shots to where they can bypass the Maginot Line too easily. So you want to stack this up, I think, is what Harry's thought process was. And then this sector, you have some time because they have to work their way through Belgium to get more units situated here in these hexes. And that's really where the dice are going to maybe decide how quickly France falls. If the Germans roll poorly, then they can hold on here. If the Germans roll really well, then maybe it'll get shut down faster. I'm going to skip over the Netherlands and Belgium because they are set up last. You actually only set these guys up after Germany starts the game by declaring war. So minors, as opposed to majors, do not get set up until declared war upon or they become aligned to an active power. So while Harry has these guys set up as well, technically they would not be set up until the game is underway. So we'll look at them last. So to reiterate the whole reaction thing, right? Commonwealth sets up, France sets up, then Germany gets to react, but after being declared war upon, the minors can kind of react to how the Germans have set up. Now, unfortunately, for the lowland countries, the Low Countries, they really don't have a chance to survive against the Germans. One thing that has always tripped me up that I always forget about is that the Germans can definitely attack from this hex to Amsterdam, because even though this kind of looks like a lake hex side or something, that is a canal that is kind of treated like a river. So the Axis definitely can attack across this hex. So if you're thinking, oh, they can only attack me from these two hexes, no, they can attack you from this one. And it sucks, and I forgot that one time. And I mean, it ultimately doesn't matter because you can't really protect the Netherlands very long. They get smushed no matter what. So let's look at the German setup, what Harry has done for the German setup. So we're going to get 1, 2, 3, 4 HQ, right? Quite a bit. We're going to get, there are going to be reinforcements, but if we just look at the primary setup, we're going to get 2 armor corps, 2 mech, 3 motorized, 15 infantry, one of which is an SS unit, 3 garrison. Apparently we get a paratrooper. I'm going to have to see where he set that up. And a whole bunch of aircraft. And really nothing for a navy in this scenario, right? Makes sense. We're not bothering with the Battle of the Atlantic here. So there's a lot here. There's a lot more to parse, and let's start looking at where he's placed the HQs, because I think that helps understand like what would you even do with all these HQs. So I need to find them all first. So he's got von Bock here. Apparently he is among the most northern HQ available. Okay, and he has Brunstedt right next to each other. Okay. And then we have von Lieb down here, and then okay, Guderian is here. So the HQs, obviously they have combat factors. You can put them in the front line. Not probably a good idea to do that. They're best used to reorganize units. So Guderian, for instance, has that 4 value in the middle parenthesis. So he can reorganize 4 units as opposed to Gort, who can only do 2. Some of these other, French HQ are not quite as good. That one's a 3, that one's a 2. So all of these German HQ are pretty good comparatively, right? So they can reorganize a lot more units. They are armor themselves, some of them. So if they did have to fight, they would get the benefits of armor. And pretty good movement rates, all things considered. So, they don't have to go very far in this scenario, but stuff to think about. And then it's also the range matters for things like offensive points, which we're not using in this scenario, but just keep in mind, offensive points do matter, and the higher the number for the HQ means the more units can benefit from spending offensive points, which is sort of like supercharging units for an offensive, but it also costs more to use that HQ for that purpose. So more units but more expensive kind of makes sense. If I look at how this is set up, we do have a fighter, we have some naval bombers. I don't know what the intention of this unit's really going to be. It can certainly help with ground support. It could be sent out to cause some trouble out in the North Sea, but I don't know I mean, I guess that's what you would use it for in this scenario. I don't think the one tactical factor helps a whole lot, but I do think this is an annoying factor for the Commonwealth to have to deal with. A little bit of naval bombardment, a little bit of air to sea factors actually goes a very long way in this game. So naval bombers are super, super useful. Even as Germany, it's nice to have a couple because they can be very disruptive if the Commonwealth player doesn't have proper fighter support for fending these guys off in the sea zones. So that is probably what the purpose of that unit setup being there right on the coast to go do. This fighter is going to escort the Stuka here, I suspect, right? It's 1, 2, 3 hexes away from Amsterdam, so that is the fine range for the fighter. The Stuka can actually reach farther, so go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this guy could go even farther out if it wanted to. And the ground units here, so we have a motorized infantry and a white print mechanized. If I think through like the stacking, these guys could very easily pop over here and attack across that canal. This guy's got one of those fighter bombers. Similarly, can probably do something like this. Alternatively, they could be the ones that come here and these guys move down to here, right? A couple different ways you can cut that and where you want them to move. In terms of the actual hex placement, it almost doesn't matter, right? What you need to do if you want to take the Netherlands out in one impulse is you just have to beat a 4 combat strength core in some slight defensive factory terrain. Not hard to do. You're not going to fail in your invasion of the Netherlands as the Axis in this game. We've got a 6 and a 5, so this is where that SS infantry unit went. Again, a fighter here with a shorter range. It only has a range of 3, so this fighter can only get to Amsterdam, it can get to Antwerp, but it can't get into France proper. It can certainly escort this Junker 88 within some distance, right? And this is a pretty okay bomber. If I look at, we have one of our armor corps here, so really more likely this stack is going to be more useful for hitting Belgium and getting into attacking Brussels or Antwerp. Luis Martinez, I loved this game. Thanks for the video. All good, Luis. That's why I'm doing this. I know folks are interested in WIF and maybe don't have enough exposure to it to really see the ins and outs. We do have motorized and mech here. We've got so we have the one of the other armor units, as well as a couple of bombers and an escorting fighter, another fighter, weaker bomber, more bombers. I mean, in general, I'll say that this setup, it makes sense to me, right? I don't see anything. I don't think there's much to explain, but to understand, like, you need to have something along the Maginot Line. So you don't want to give the French some weird opportunity to attack, right? So you're going to need at least something. But you can see the garrison's down here. It doesn't have a lot of movement. It doesn't need to go anywhere. It's really there for defensive purposes. Here, you can see another garrison. Not much to do. Same thing here. Here's where we see a little bit more movement because it is more feasible that we have 1, 2, 3, 4 hexes to attack Strasbourg. Even with the fortress line, we could, hit this corner and have units that can get in here and start moving through. So that makes sense here. These units, likewise. But you'll notice something. All the units with high movement factor, which is the second number on a counter, all the higher factor units are more in the north because they're going to swing through here, right? I know that's common sense. That would be, of course, Steve, that's how you would set it up. But a newbie might make that mistake, might not realize, you need to be thinking multiple impulses ahead of time as you're operating through here. Now, Amsterdam's going to fall very, very quickly, so a lot of this is going to be, you know, you want to get the units, again, this fast-moving stack, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, depending on what optional rules you're using, the surprise miners may not have Zocs, which means that these guys, instead of having to move here and having to stop, if you're playing with that optional rule, you could get them into Rotterdam, or even this hex if you really wanted to, though there's a straight there. I'm not sure I would do that. You get all the way out here, and then all of a sudden, being able to attack Antwerp is good, because now you've got, you know, maybe it's these guys move here, what I showed earlier. These guys are moving here. You could probably get away with trying to attack Amsterdam with just this hex and this hex, while these guys attack here. You have this stack moving like so. Maybe one of these guys moves up to here. Oh, I didn't even talk about the paratroopers yet, but we will. So you can kind of see, like, it's all set up that you want to maximize the amount of damage you can do and focused effort. So this fighter and bomber focus on taking out Amsterdam. The rest of these fighters and bombers are going to be destined for either Belgium or held in reserve for France. And the thing you have to watch out for as we look at all this stuff is that when Germany declares war on the Netherlands and Belgium, that's considered a surprise round. So things like rivers do not help the defender, and they can't fly their planes. So while the Netherlands has a fighter and Belgium has a fighter, they can't use that on the first impulse because they're surprised. This is why when we look at where the Netherlands units are and where the Belgian units are, they're set up that way. So like the Netherlands fighter has nowhere else to go but Amsterdam. It is the last bastion. It is the only hope. You just hope they roll snake eyes and somehow this guy survives to the second impulse. Here, this unit is, this Belgian fighter is about as far back from the Germans as they could ever hope to be. Maybe you could set it up here, but again, depending on the breakthrough kind of thing, it's conceivable that this is not a great hex for it. But they can't help anybody. If they survive to the second impulse, then you can do something with these guys, but they need to be as far back away from that front line of the Germans as possible. If we are playing with the optional rule where surprise miners have no Zocs, then yeah, you probably would be trying to set it up over here or in a city or something, hoping that snake eyes are rolled, because otherwise, well, I guess the French would have Zocs here. I don't know. I think all this setup makes sense. And then where the units are actually set up, Harry's chosen to separate them out, so 1 unit per important hex. So 1 in Antwerp, which is an objective city, its name is in red. 1 in the capital here, and 1 in Liege. Some of this, I don't know. It's like what your objective is to try to do as much damage as the Germans as possible, force as many die rolls as possible. So I think there's one perspective to say, well, why don't you double stack in Brussels and keep Belgium alive for as long as possible? Well, it's likely that the Germans, however they want to, whenever they want to, are going to get enough combat factors to take Brussels no matter what. But at least if you spread out the combats, they have to fight for Liege, which is going to have a factory which provides defensive bonus. Same thing with Brussels. Antwerp doesn't really, but they, limited choices. The more they're rolling dice, the greater chance they're going to roll something bad that will at least cause the German units to, maybe they lose 1 unit. So that's build points that they have to spend to replenish the Wehrmacht. Or they're going to flip and cause an HQ to have to reorganize them, or offensive points be spent, or something along those lines, where you're trying to deprive Germany of actions as part of the action economy, or resources of having to rebuild stuff. Because Belgium's going to fall. And in a global war campaign, you definitely know that France is going to fall at some point. It's a matter of when and how long it took the Germans and how bloody it was for the Germans. You know you're going to lose it, but you want to slow down the Germans as much as possible so that they're less prepared to go into the Balkans, they're less prepared to go into Russia. They have to spend production points rebuilding units that are good rather than, if they get away clean and they don't lose anything taking France, or they don't lose anything taking the Low Countries, well, then they can spend more build points, building more naval bombers that they might not have otherwise built and harass more shipping, or they're building even more subs than they would have otherwise built and harassing Commonwealth shipping. So, every fight ends up mattering in some form, which is good. I see that as a strength, right? It helps to actually try to do as much damage as possible with the Dutch and the Belgians against the Germans, and likewise for the French. So I can kind of reset things a little bit, right? I'm going to pop out, I'm going to reload the setup to get us sort of back to point one. Again, knowing that this is not the right HQ, and this garrison should not be there. Overall, I think that the setup that Harry's provided, it does totally make sense. And if you look at the lessons that it teaches, I think that helps you through the rest of the game, right? HQ should not be in the front line. Use defensive terrain where you can to protect them. Have fighter cover for your HQs. In situations where you're up against the wall, because it's this scenario in particular, it is case yellow, you do have to work within a lane. In a broader global campaign, right, if you're trying to defend as Russia, there's a lot more to consider. That's worth looking at, if we start talking about the Barbarossa scenario. But I think even these just basic walkthroughs of Harry's setup, the designer of the game, why set up this way, starts to peel back the layers of complexity beyond just learning the rules, but getting to the point where you can understand this is actually what good play starts to look like. It doesn't pay to have the French armor over here, right? There is a better place for it. And you'll find that due to the way the production rules work for this game, you may pull different things at different times that may impact your ability to do what you want to do. An example of that, you can watch the video I just did the other day, earlier this week, about doing strategic bombardment from Crete, attacking Italy as the Commonwealth. If you have the right land bombers that you've built in production, you might be able to do some things that you couldn't do otherwise. But the way that the production system works in this game is that when you go to build something, you're figuring out how many build points you have, and then you're purchasing units from the force pool. So you have to decide, like, I would like to build, we'll say, a land 3-turn bomber. They're organized by turns, so when we say land 2, land 3, land 4, what we're referring to is the number of turns it takes to build them. So say I want to build more land 3 bombers, well, I'm going to spend, without other special rules involved, or optional rules I should say, 5 build points, and we're going to draw from the force pool, but we're going to draw blindly. We don't know what we're going to get. So if I say I'm just going to drag and drop 1 unit, so I'm going to build 1, and I flip it over to, and I can already see, you only see 1 counter in the bucket in Vassal. You can see I dragged and dropped and it says 1935 on it. That means I drew the 1935 3-turn bomber, and he's not so good. His range is only 5, he's got low values, that sucks. If I was luckier, I might have drawn this one. Same build points expenditure, vastly different values. This guy has a 7 range, 14 if we did extended, 3 factors for strategic or tactical bombing. Much, much, much better than this plane. But I don't get to pick. I have to draw. So if I drew this plane, I'd be thinking, okay, I definitely could use this to bomb Italy from Crete, for instance. This guy, I could not. There is a concept in the game called scrapping, which means that based on the age of a unit, you can remove a unit from your force pool so that you don't draw the crappy stuff. And you can see, let's see, it's not here. Yeah, they have a scrapped pool. Now, as part of the setup for this scenario, there's a whole bunch of stuff that would be in the Commonwealth force pool that are scrapped because they're off map. So you can see there's a bunch of Canadian stuff, Indian stuff, South African stuff that for the purposes of this case yellow scenario are out of the game, right? They're considered off map or they're just not available. They're being built elsewhere because, again, this scenario is zoomed into just the French theater. So when we get to production for this scenario, we're only going to be building building from the force pools that the scenario has allowed for us to have. But in a normal game context, I might say, at a certain point, like, where's that 35? I don't like this guy. I'm going to right click. I'm going to send him to the scrapped pool so that I don't draw him again. Now, it means I have less bombers in total, but I have a greater chance of pulling a good one because I'm only going to spend so much money on that. And there's an art to scrapping that I will say I am not an expert in. Not yet, anyway. But there does get a point, if you're in 1942, you probably want to be scrapping your oldest stuff because you want the newest stuff and you need it now, not, oops, I accidentally built something crappy. That's just part of the system, and there are reasons for it. I think the gameplay reason, or like the history to gameplay mechanic reason, is that for land units, you don't know what unit's good, right? You say I want an infantry corps. Is that infantry corps going to perform well? Well, you don't know until they're out in the field, so that's sort of one abstraction. For things like planes, ships, that sort of thing, a buddy of mine sort of views it as like you're sort of building, but you're building based on the political and corporate influences. You're going to build this plane because it makes sense to build, even though it turns out to not be the best design, but it's put out in the field. It's sort of this weird hazy area, but it does mean like you have no guarantee, right? If given a choice in 1940, you're always going to build this type of model plane because it's just the best. We know with historical hindsight that this is just the best. This turned out to be the best one. It didn't have any production or mechanical problems and supporting it over time. You don't get to play with that hindsight, right? You just kind of get what you've invested in, which is more armor, more planes, more fighters, etc. Unwound 93 had said, had a look online, couldn't find why WoW was in the setup. There was someone else asking the same question on BGG, but got no real answer. I think this is just a mistake, because I think what I think Harry probably did is he was setting up the scenario, he left the HQ in the force pool and pulled it or something, and that must be what it is. So if you're going to use this Vassal setup, like I did before I restarted the scenario, go in, grab Gort, and swap them out, because this was an error, an oversight, right? And I guess when it comes to the pre-setup, this is the only scenario that Harry has provided a setup for. Everything else is going to be open to the players. It's just, I guess it was bound to be some error was possible or some mistake in the setup was possible, and that's what we encountered here. When we look at setting up other scenarios like Barbarossa, Lebensraum, or the Guadalcanal scenario, it is important to very carefully go through the campaign setup. So as we look at the future 2023 living campaign document, right, we say, hey, victory in the West. It is really important to carefully go through the setup rules and make sure that you have um, done things correctly, because you're going to end up with weird stuff if not, right? And you can see, let me say like the special rules. Remove all units apart from Belgian, French, German, Moroccan, Netherlands, Senegalese, and British. Remove all naval units except those specified to be set up. Remove all Commonwealth and German militia and French mountain units. So this line about removing Commonwealth and German militia, I think is like the goof where one of those garrisons slipped in. It's a garrison is not a militia, but this Commonwealth guy here, he really shouldn't be there either, and he is in the setup. So, there's always a little bit of weirdness. There may have been at one point some errata. Maybe there was something where they planned for you to like spend victory points, give the German victory points for using that HQ versus Gort, and it just never made it in. I don't see anything about that in here. So it's just this kind of stuff. If you're not playing the global scenario, then you've got to worry about the weird things that you have to do to make the scenario what it is for just what you're looking at. Because the game truly is designed to be played in the global version more than anything else, right? Most big World War II games, that's sort of an assumption. If I look at Global War Setup Deluxe, this might actually take a minute to load because the map files are going to be huge. That Global War setup is it's just all the rules at once, right? It's all the rules the way they're meant to be played. Setting it up is easier, where for these smaller scenarios where you're truncating the map, you're truncating the available force pools, you're truncating the fact that the edge of the world exists, where the map only goes so far, so you have different special rules that govern it. That's where you can find yourself tripping up because you're not reading things carefully, and you accidentally give the Americans a few extra units than they're supposed to have because you were supposed to scrap these Marine units, and if you glossed over that, then all of a sudden the Americans have Marine units that they shouldn't have in a given scenario. That kind of stuff can crop up. But you can see for the global setup we get all the maps, everything all together. The Americas map is still a separate window. One thing I really like about Vassal is you can have these different pop-up windows. I can move them off to another monitor. I have a 3-monitor setup here, and you guys are seeing just the primary monitor. I can drag stuff off to the side, and I can take a counter, out of a window onto here. I can drag it off to another screen across the ether of my desktop and drop it into one of these other windows, and it's fine. And that ease of transferring objects just makes Vassal absolutely awesome. And it is why I prefer to use Vassal compared to, say, trying to play the World in Flames PC game. I have it, I've bought it, and I just would rather do it in Vassal. It just is easier for me to process. So I'm going to do a quick time check. So we're going an hour and a half, over an hour and a half. I can still record for a while longer yet. So for the next bit of the stream, and really this is going to be stuff that is more relevant into the future, I like Harry's setup, I like referencing it, but ultimately what I would rather do is do my own setup, because I would rather play with all the fixins with the deluxe rules, because that's what I'm used to. When me and my buddies play, we play deluxe with a lot of optional rules. Wise Guy History asks, can you elaborate on why it's easier to process in Vassal than the PC game? Is the PC automated? Okay, so see if I don't want to try to. I don't think I have it installed on this computer, so I couldn't show you immediately. I could try to look some screenshots up, but the PC game was designed to be a way to play World in Flames oppose. There is no AI, so you can certainly play it solitaire. You could definitely do that. But there's a couple of deficiencies. One, it took a long time to make. Slow progress, few people working on it, but it did eventually come out. It is designed to the version of World in Flames that preceded Collector's Edition. So it was designed for what was called at the time Final Edition, which turned out to not be the Final Edition. So that's always the funny thing about World in Flames. But not Collector's Edition. So it is a PC game based on a version of the game that is older and thus a little bit different than the latest, which is, if you're like OCD about things like that sometimes, like I am, that's just crazy. The thing about a PC game is, even if it is attempting to exactly model the board game, you have to learn the way the UI was created and set up for the PC game. So if you're trying to do something that in a real world game is just, I need to move my convoys from here back to base, or I need to do these different things. The PC game might be designed in such a way that you have to learn the UI, the menus, the interface for that PC game. You have to know what will be automated for you and how it is automated for you. Where if you're playing in Vassal, you're just dragging stuff around like real life, right? It's just like the physical board game, except in a digital interface. That does mean you could cheat, right? You're just moving stuff around. You could cheat, but if you know the rules and you're following the rules, it is just a mechanism to play a board game like you would in a physical capacity. But the PC game is like you have to navigate around how the PC game is trying to do things for you. But if there's a bug or there's something that the PC game is maybe doing in a way that you didn't expect, trying to get back out of it or to fix things, you're having to operate in that vein. So it's been a while since I've messed with the World in Flames PC game, so maybe there's some credit I should be giving to it that I'm not here. At the end of the day, when I tried to use it, I just got to the point where I said, you know what, I'm just going to do Vassal, because it is a little more free form. I don't feel restricted. I can drag stuff how I want. I can make little reminders for myself with the various Vassal features much more easily than the PC game. And at a price point comparison, I don't remember how much I paid for the World in Flames PC game. I think, like, if you're buying the Vassal module, the price, I think it just works out better that the Vassal module is just better for me. I mean, if folks have used it and have opinions on that, definitely comment and let me know. I mean, it might be fun in a different video or stream to reinstall it, boot it up, and try to navigate it. But I recall being a little frustrated with it sometimes. The other thing, I can't recall, I think the PC game has the Commonwealth units as blue, and that drives me up a wall. They have to be khaki or I'm out. That is one of the really annoying things about the 5th edition of World in Flames, is that it still had the old, like, dark blue Commonwealth units, which made black text on blue a nightmare, and was just a harder color to deal with, where just the absolute wonderful khaki, when they did Khaki in Flames as an expansion, and then they just made it the base game counters for Collector's Edition, was a triumph. That was a good decision. Good job, whoever decided that's the way it should be for Collector's Edition. Just 100% excellent choice, good choice for that. So when it comes to what we'll be looking at into the future for other streams, because this stream is going to last so long, and then I'm going to be out of gas. I would like to do more streams for World in Flames, and what I'd like to do is to start to step through the smaller scenarios to help talk about the actual tactical strategy, start to approach that intermediate, like, why are we doing this versus something else? Not that I'm an expert, but I can try. I want to start to do that, but I would like to do it with the deluxe stuff turned on. So Harry's setup was just the classic. I would much rather do deluxe, where I know the rules for deluxe well enough that I would rather do that. Um, let's see what Unwound 93 says. What we should really do in the far future is get some veterans like Wendell and Bruce to play a multiplayer global war scenario with you. That would be very cool. And Wendell, I can't give that guy enough praise, thumbs up, claps, because Wendell's been out there answering questions, helping the community forever. And he is one of the whiff gurus who knows his stuff. Bruce Jaron is also very active. He wrote a lot of the player notes. That would be fun for sure. I'm really jealous of one of my partners in our group because he actually got to go to WIFCon in California a couple months ago, and to me, just having the ability to be amongst expert players is huge. Like just to see what they're doing, like the obvious things, like, oh, you never do this, Steve, never do that, because this is what will happen if you do. It's that kind of stuff that is precisely the expertise that you could not gain without a huge amount of trial and error. So Wendell, Bruce, being able to play with those guys would be interesting. To try to coordinate schedules would probably be very difficult. It is very hard for me to coordinate things without a lot of hassle because of life and other things, but would definitely appreciate working through that. I have never felt like I've played a session or playthrough game with my in-person gaming group where I felt like I've done a very good job, except as I think when I played Japan last, I did pretty good. Like I think I had a pretty good grasp on Japan, but most other times that I played, it's like I'm putting up an okay fight, but I don't think I'm playing very well. And in my current game as the Commonwealth, I'm doing very poorly. Very poorly. But I also didn't like the Commonwealth when I started off, so that's sort of a personal conceit that I have. I wouldn't... One thing I would actually like, and I don't know if he's watching, if he is, drop a comment. I would love to have some time with Tabletop's Edge and talk about World in Flames, because Tabletop Edge did such a great job with the tutorial videos, and I do get the sense that he has a lot more games under his belt. He's been playing for a while. I wouldn't mind an opportunity to talk with him about the game and do sort of a collaboration on World in Flames stuff. I think that'd be a lot of fun. I think the thing that I wish exists that doesn't is, like, I wish there was a World in Flames podcast where somebody is just out there talking about World in Flames on a regular basis. I think that'd be a lot of fun. And if it gets to that point where if someone's not doing it, why not you? But I don't feel like I'm good enough to support such a thing. But anyway, a bit of a tangent. But my goal for the future here is to set up some of these smaller scenarios with some of the deluxe stuff and optional roles turned on, so to speak, so that folks kind of get a sense of, like, how is the game operating with all this deluxe stuff included? What's this game like with the optionals included? Why do you even pick the optional rules that you pick, Steve? Is there a reason? Yeah, there is a reason. We have a set of rules that our group has settled on. There's some that I don't like as much as others, or that I'd rather have something else turned on. But I do want to talk about that here very shortly. But I want to set up my own setup. It will probably be derived from Harry's setup. I'll probably do some of that setup not during a stream, just so I'm not wasting your guys' time. But talking through some of this stuff, I think, would be helpful. And I'll say, if you're new to World in Flames and you're just getting your head wrapped around the system, there is a huge wealth of information in the player notes that Bruce Jaron has put together. You would be amazed how valuable it is to read all the player notes all the way through, from front to cover. So, like, if you read the Victory in the West player notes, you're going to get some basic things about the West Front. If you read the Barbarossa notes, you're going to read some tactical advice that is good for the global game, but obviously is useful in the cutout that you're getting the whole way through. And as you start to get into the big campaign notes, and we'll go to the global war one for a second. So here's Germany, right? This is the section for Germany. You see this whole column, then this whole column, then this whole column, until, whoop, there's Italy. So you basically get a page and a half of player notes for Germany. That is, we'll say that's the strategic level. Like, that's the high level, hey, Germany, here's player notes for the whole global war scenario. But if you combine that with the player notes for, let's see, there's the Barbarossa one. And Germany is in here somewhere. Germany. You start to get a little bit more in the tactical stuff. So advice like, set up your armor, mech, and motorized in 2-unit hunter-killer stacks. Well, this note is not in the global war. It's a little more tactical. So read all of this stuff. And it takes some time, right? This is a lot of text, don't get me wrong. But I think like this is the start of understanding the game a little bit better than just how do the rules work? How do you play the game? These player notes are really well written. Bruce did a really good job of providing, a lot of practical advice that you can read and go, okay, if I do that, if I do what was described, I'm at least moving in the right direction. It's going to get me somewhere that's valuable. The general player notes as well help a lot with, so there's some sections on grand strategy, action choice. They start talking about the naval system, so going into like, okay, you have naval superiority, you have parity, you have inferiority. How should you operate? What is good? I particularly like the line here where they talk about good all-around task force is 3 carriers, 2 battleships, and 2 cruisers. Now, if you're playing with ships and flames, that number might be modified, right? Because you're going to have probably 3 carriers, several battleships, some CAs, some CLs. I'm not sure I don't know what this statement looks like under the guise of a deluxe game, but I think even this stuff helps you go from completely oblivious, right? You're just slapping stuff together and throwing it into a C zone to, hey, this actually gets you somewhere. It gets you something resembling decent play because the system is explained a little bit more than just here's a dictation of the rules. And Wise Guy History, yeah, absolutely agree. Tabletop's Edge, he puts out some great content. So if you guys have not, I should say, for you 10 folks watching, if you've not seen Tabletop's Edge, go put that in your YouTube search bar in another tab or whatever, and subscribe to him. He does great stuff. I've mostly watched his World in Flames stuff just to see how well of a job he had done and why I had recommended folks go to those videos rather than my old tutorial videos from way back in the day. He did a much better job. And his basement, which he did a game room walkabout video, he's got a pretty killer basement. That is a great gamepad to hang out and play games. Super cool. I should do a walkabout of my game room too, probably at some point, but not as cool as his place. He's got a really nice setup. Okay, so another time check. We're 2 hours in. So the next thing I was going to do, which maybe we save for another stream, or maybe this is a dedicated offline video. I don't know what's best, but what I would like to focus in on are these optional rules. Because what I'd like to do is establish for the future, if I do streams for Victory in the West, Barbarossa, Guadalcanal, any and all of these, what I'd like to do is stick to a solid list of optional rules, so that whichever scenario we're playing in the future, everybody knows this is the baseline that we're operating on. These are the reasons why I would choose to use these optional rules. I think this is the thing that intimidates people, because they see, there's 60 optional rules. What am I doing? And there's expansions. I don't want to learn this game. This is too complicated. It's really not so bad, but it's seeing the forest for the trees kind of thing. So out of these 60, the reality is you're probably gonna use, I don't know, you're probably gonna use a lot more than 10 if you're doing a lot of the expansion stuff. But thankfully, the rule book is written that all these optional rules are in line in the rules alongside the base rules. So it's all about, are you going to read this paragraph that has a colored box around it or not? And if you're not, then you don't worry about it. And if you are, sometimes it's like it's a 1 or 2 line rule. It's just, do you want minors to have, minor countries, do you want their units to have Zocs on a surprise round or not? Because major powers do, but it's sort of a crutch to allow the fall of Netherlands and Belgium to go a little bit easier, because the units don't have Zocs. That's all the optional rule really is for. And if you decide you don't want to do that, then you don't do that. The Vassal module is nice because you can come into this window and you can right click and you can select it and you say, as a reminder to myself, we are playing with Planes and Flames. We are going to play with Ships and Flames. We are not going to play with the African, American, and Scandinavian maps. So we're going to leave that unselected. It's pretty straightforward stuff from that angle. What is nice is that ADG did put a legend to this, and this comes with the physical game as well. This is in one of the rule books or campaign books. They say we always play with the green ones. We often play with the blue ones. We sometimes play with the orange ones. And this list was cultivated over time as stuff that people liked, that they implemented. Maybe it was a house rule for a while, and it got used enough. They said, okay, we'll make it an optional rule. Like, it makes sense. Here's the historical reason for it. Some of these things, when you really look at them, right, you can totally understand why, like, if it's a sometimes, you're just going to ignore it. A great example of that is minimum impulses. And I can tell you very quickly, all this optional rule is that based on a given month turn of the year, there will always be a guaranteed minimum number of impulses, so that you can't have a super short summer turn because maybe that impacts game balance too much. The turn can end based on a die roll after so many impulses have occurred. And what this does is says, no matter what, you're at least going to get this many impulses. I don't see the need for this rule. Because sometimes you get weird swingy results where a turn ends sooner than you think. I don't think that it's necessarily worth playing. And I could see why it's a sometimes play. You don't need it. But if somebody's got a chip on their shoulder about a summer where Barbarossa got cut short in a finger snap, maybe they're going to advocate for this rule. And if it's not a big deal, you say, okay, we'll play with that optional. There are other ones that almost, to me, feel like they need to be there. They should definitely be there. And that's for if you're playing with, like, okay, the cadre rule. I really like the cadre rule. I think that should be on most of the time. And so do the designers. A cadre rule is just that when you lose a unit, assuming it is near the front line, is probably supported with HQs, is in supply, you get a little bit of production back for a unit that you lost. And that is to help represent the fact that when you lose a unit in combat, and you lose a corps, like, that's not 35,000 people just going poof into thin air. You get something back. Like, that unit is rendered combat inoperative. It can no longer fight, but you didn't just have 35,000 people disappear. You get a little bit of that production back. That can be funneled into rebuilding a unit, that sort of thing. I like that rule. Use that, right? There's another one on here. I forget which number it is now, where it is gearing limits. So gearing limit is a constraint around production, and I think it used to be a mandatory rule, and then they made it an optional rule. Here it is, 39. We often play. I would always play with gearing, personally. And what that is you can't go from building 4 armor units one turn to building 4 paratroopers the next turn. Gearing limits are such that if you ever played Hearts of Iron, the PC game, they have a function that's like this where um, you get really efficient at building something that you've already been building a lot of. And if you all of a sudden tell all of your factories to start building something else, well, they're not going to be as efficient at it. And it's almost a strategy within a strategy where, like as the Americans, like you're building a ton of convoys all the time, so that later in the game you're going to start spitting out Essex class carriers a lot faster. Why? Because your factories are used to building naval components. They're just pretty good at it now, and we can build a lot at once if that's what you want to build. Um, so I like gearing limits. That to me will be something turned on all the time. But there's a lot of other stuff in here where, it's up to taste. Now, if you're going to play with the expansions, there are optional rules that are like just straight up for the expansions. Like, are you playing with Divisions and Flames? If so, you are automatically playing this option, whether you like it or not. If you're playing with that expansion with those counters, you are playing with the optional rule 2 on. There are divisions. They exist. You can build them. You can use them. They're a thing. By definition, you're also doing artillery. Planes and Flames, well, if you're using the Planes and Flames expansion, you're going to play with Planes and Flames. Ships and Flames. Cruisers and Flames, yeah. Now, Convoys and Flames is a little bit different because this optional rule adds a couple of different units that are oddball. And you can also decide if you want to have, and we play with this rule, it's kooky. You have not only convoys to transport build points, resources overseas, you would also have oil tankers. So you can't use the same convoys to transport oil as you transport other things. And my group plays with it, and as a Commonwealth, it's really annoying. But I'm used to it now, and I get it, and it's a distinct thing. You need to transport oil with oil tankers. So that would be part of optional rule 7, I think, unless it's another one on here. And I'm fouling up because I'm losing track of everything on here. I would play with that. Sure, yeah, that's what we do. Aircraft abilities, even though it has a lot of references here in the rules, all it really means is that some aircraft units have a marker on them, or a number is like colored red, and it just means that like they're a sub hunter. They're good at hunting subs. Well, if you don't want that level of minutia, don't play with the optional rule. If you think that's cool, or that there's a sub hunter plane or there's a tank buster plane that's really good at busting up tanks, if you think that's cool, then you turn that on. That's all. Surprise Zocs, that's what I was talking about with the minor countries, turn that on. Pacific and Asian Zocs, I can't remember if my group plays with this or not. I think we do. So do units have Zocs on the Pacific map? That's all that is really for. And the thing is, because that map is on a different scale, where functionally each map, or each hex on the Pacific map is worth 2 hexes of the European map, we say, well, does a core project enough force to qualify for a Zoc? Well, if you want to fight over it, it's just an optional rule. You can decide whether it does or not. Supply units, just more stuff that you could build. HQ supply, can you provide supply to units, like emergency supplies from an HQ? Does a HQ, do you believe it should have a inherent amount of supplies to use in emergency purposes to supply a unit cut off? If so, you can turn that on. There's all these little things that here like that, and some of them can be easily ignored, others not so much. Intelligence is a whole thing. I don't play with intelligence. Spending oil. This is actually one of the really important ones that can shift the game a whole lot, because there are oil resources on the map. Here in Austria, there's one. If this map included Romania, we would see there are some in Romania, obviously. Those can be treated as just resources that are taken to factories and create build points. Or they become an actual constraint on your economy. where you spend oil to move units that would use up oil. So that just because the Germans have tanks doesn't mean they can do everything that they want all the time without limit, without some cost. And that drives the German player to actually seek oil, as they historically did, or that was at least a concern. So when they say we always play with oil, I'd say, yeah, we always play with oil too. It's an assumed part of the game. So what I'm going to want to do, because I realize that we're getting pretty long in our runtime here, I will want to go through this list in not really more detail, I guess, but what I'm going to want to do is define, here's what we're going to play with in these streams, what I consider to be a sort of baseline that my group uses, and maybe I'll throw something in that we don't ordinarily use that I wish we did, but I got voted down on it. Stuff like bounce combat, which that's not going to have any meaning to you unless you read the rulebook. That's for air combat, that sort of thing. We'll go through these. Again, many of these, it's kamikazes. Okay, do you want the Japanese to be able to do a version of kamikaze attacks in this game system, where they destroy the air unit and the pilot, but they have a greater chance of damaging ships? Do you want that to be a rule or not? Yes or no? If so, you turn it on. That's all that really comes down to. Okay, guys, so we are now officially at 2 hours, 10 minutes of the stream. That's pretty long for me. I think I'm going to want to wrap things up. So here's what I want to do looking ahead. So in this video, we talked a lot about Harry's setup for Victory in the West, knowing that, again, he is setting that up from a classic game perspective. The next stream, which I cannot promise exactly when that will be, unfortunately, my life is too hectic for it, but I will give warning ahead of time so that if you want to be here, you'll be able to be. It'll likely be on the weekend, because that's when I have free time. We will take a look at Victory in the West from a deluxe game standpoint. We'll talk through the optional rules that I want to use, and I will set up the scenario for the individual powers with the additional counters, because if we're playing Victory in the West with the expansions, there's more stuff. And we'll talk about why these things work the way that they work for the expansion content, and we'll set it up. And there will be differences. There will be artillery involved. Where do you place your artillery? Why would you place it where you put it? How does that affect the game? Does it make sense for France to be building a whole lot of artillery? There's a strategy in support of that idea. We'll take a look at all of that stuff in the next stream. And if we're even fortunate enough, we'll get to playing Victory in the West, at least a little bit, and start showing the way it plays. Now, Victory in the West is a 5-turn scenario. You can probably get through a truncated map scenario like that pretty quickly, maybe even in one stream if we really wanted to. Even faster if I were playing poorly and not thinking through all my moves. So maybe we'd get it all knocked out in one stream. I don't know. I can't make a promise yet until we get there. And obviously the more interaction I have with you guys, the more questions, the more there will be to discuss. But we'll shoot for maybe somewhere over the next couple of weeks for that next stream. I'll do an announcement for it. We'll have it on the schedule. You will know about it ahead of time before the stream. And if you can pop in, great. If you can't make it, we'll still aim to have the recording up afterwards, and we'll take it from there, guys. So really appreciate you folks that joined this first stream of mine. I'm not used to doing that, doing the stream thing. This is my first time doing it. I'm still going to get more comfortable doing it over time, but I really appreciate those who showed up. So Wise Guy History, Unwound 93, Dwight Hall says thank you, I want more. Geoff White says thanks for tonight's gig. Wise Guy History says thanks, Stephen. Thank you guys. Thank you for being here. I wasn't sure who was going to show up. Curmudgeons with Dice, Kenneth Klobby, Henry Knox, Fine Books, Peter Bergs, everyone who showed up today. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. We'll talk more with stuff in the future. Maybe we'll do more streams about other stuff too. It's all time based, all time priority. But World in Flames is definitely worth the time and the effort to learn, to play, to talk about. So Yeah, we'll wrap it up here, guys. Again, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. We'll get the recorded version of this up soon, or I'm not sure. I think this, when I hit end stream, there's going to be a version of this on the YouTube channel right away. So if you're coming in late, you can watch it right away. And until next time, guys, thank you again so much for being here. Take care and keep on gaming.